Thank you for joining us today. I want to kick it over to Wendy Mann, Crew Network CEO, to say a few words.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Get On Board, Corporate Board Service for Women. We are embarking on this area of corporate board service. As you know, it's been something that's been part of Crew Network's strategic goals for a long time to really focus on helping women find those opportunities. And what happened last year in California with the passage of the law requiring a particular number of women to be on corporate boards was a great way for us to kind of get a push forward on this. You know, corporate board services is, I like to say, maybe not something you choose, but something that chooses you in many ways. And being prepared, being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people are all going to be part of that. So I'm looking forward today for this opportunity for our senior executive women to find this great niche in our organization for learning and growing and creating a path forward for themselves in corporate board leadership. And we have some wonderful speakers who can share some great insights on that. So thank you for being with us. And we look forward to moving forward in this area in the future as we get more and more executive women looking for those opportunities. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Wendy. A few housekeeping things before we dig into the content. As you have questions today, please submit them via the Q&A feature. You can find that on your Zoom taskbar. It's just a lot easier to keep up with when we have 300 people in the webinar versus the chat feature. So if you wouldn't mind using that tool, that'd be appreciated. We will take questions at the end of the webinar, so we'll open up the floor for questions towards the end. You will receive a link to the recording and a quick evaluation within 24 hours of the webinar ending. So that would be great if you would fill that out and give us some feedback. And then one other note, tomorrow registration opens for our corporate board training that we're having in April in Chicago. And so stay tuned for those details. Our speakers today, we are really fortunate to have three wonderful speakers. Matrice Ellis-Kirk, she's a senior member of RSR Partners Board Recruiting and Chief Executive Officers Practice. She serves as a member of the RSR Partners Executive Committee and has over 20 years of experience in the executive search industry. Judy Nitsch. Judy's the founding principal of Nitsch Engineering. She's vice chair of the Board of Trustees at the Boston Architectural College, a trustee of Eastern Bank, a member of the Board of Directors of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. She co-chaired the Chamber Real Estate Development Committee for 14 years, and she was the 2014 president of Crew Network. Eliza Solender is president of Solender Hall. She serves on the board of directors of Origin Bank Corp., chairs the compensation committee, and serves on the nominating and governance and risk committees as well. She chairs the advisory board for Lost Oak Winery. And Eliza was the 1999 president of NN Crew, now known as Crew Network. So welcome, ladies, and I'm going to send it over to Matrice to get us started.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for the introduction. I thought we'd begin this whole conversation with just talking in general about what is a board, and then from there talk about the landscape in the boardroom and what it really takes to be on a board, and what you can do to actually begin your board service. So on the next slide, we go to what is a board, and I'm not going to go through each one of these slides, but you will have access to them at a later time. But truly, a board is all about a governing body that is present to represent its stakeholders. And I say stakeholders because different types of boards represent different types of individuals, especially when you're talking about the difference between a public and a private board. And to that end, really, a public board is a paid board. It is an entity that is there to represent the shareholders and has a number of responsibilities that we'll talk about as we go through this process. But I think it's important to note that a private company is different from a public company in that a private company is truly an advisor to the board or to the CEO. It's a board that typically has no ownership in the business. Sometimes they're closely held, they can be family held, they can be one primary owner. But it definitely has a number of governance opportunities to serve very similar to that of a public company. But again, a private company is there truly as an advisor to the CEO. In addition, there are other boards like mutual funds and ESOPs, as well as pension funds. And those boards are typically representing the funds. And because of the regulatory components around those boards, they typically are aligned to a 1940 Act that was enacted by Congress. And there are processes that one goes through. Those boards typically require a significant amount of time and a significant amount of financial expertise. In addition, I'll let Eliza talk a little bit about an advisory board or a not-for-profit board.
So the advisory boards are an opportunity for you to really go into helping the company and advise them on a variety of things. Some companies have overall advisory boards, others may have specialty advisory boards that are dealing with everything. Like you might see American Airlines has an advisory board made up of chefs to help them guide them on their menus. So advisory boards are fun. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not. Usually they give you an opportunity to maybe have services given to you as a form of compensation. They're a good first step towards going on a corporate board. Not-for-profit boards, I strongly recommend that everyone get that experience. The fact is that they give you a networking opportunity, but they also teach you about the governance of how to serve on a board and what's involved in serving on a board. So all of those are wonderful board opportunities.
So with that, most boards that are corporate, and we're going to focus our attention on corporate boards, and those are the paid boards. They are typically governed by a set of rules based on its company's domicile. On the next slide, we do speak to the primary ownership, and it's typically Delaware. You will hear companies say they're Dutch Antilles companies or companies that are engaged in other regions. Eliza's on a board in Louisiana that's domiciled in Louisiana. But most companies are headquartered or domiciled in Delaware. And they're there for a number of reasons, primarily legal reasons. And it's the ruling that they have are typically around duty of care and loyalty. When you hear the words fiduciary responsibility, those are words that come out of primarily the Delaware law requirements of companies. But there are no laws that truly regulate governance. So that is why you will see most companies are headquartered in Delaware. They have what we call the business judgment rule. Again, that's around fiduciary responsibility. Next slide. And it really is focused around the rules of just having sound judgment and doing your best and getting as much information as you can to ensure that you have had good judgment. But it really is about what is the role of a board. Next slide. A board has really 4 major responsibilities. A board is there to oversee the shareholder value. It is there to mitigate risk. It is there to hire and fire a CEO and to be aware of its succession planning for instances where you might lose your CEO or key members of your leadership team. The board really has some very finite responsibilities in terms of what they do, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go forward around the difference between a board and management. But on the next slide, we talk about the boardroom landscape today. And I think that slide is out of turn, but we can go to the next one, please. Oh, looks like we've actually been completely out of turn. Well, let's just talk a little bit about, you can just hold it there. There we go, thank you, the landscape.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you kind of went ahead of us. There we go, thank you. As we go through the landscape of a board, it really is looking at the issues that they have to address. And what we've done is identified a number of issues that have been top of mind in 2019 that were really identified through the National Association of Corporate Directors and Morgan Stanley, as well as E&Y. But the overarching aspects of what they're all trying to get to is, how do you embrace the duality of strategy? So looking at disruption and all of the things that are going on in the world today, and setting up your organization to create and to build opportunity in that environment. It is also about accelerating the talent agenda and activating culture as a strategic asset, really knowing how to build your company and to create the conversation at the top so that it permeates throughout the organization in a way that attracts talent in this time where, as we all know, there is a war on talent. It's also about transforming the governance of risk management and understanding that not only do you have to mitigate your risks, but be aware of its future risks and the opportunities that you're trying to seize and how that actually correlates to the business that you're driving. It's also strengthening communication and engaging with the stakeholders. It's not just enough to say, I am there managing shareholder value, but how are you engaging with your shareholders? Are you talking with the entities that vote the proxies to really understand what it is that your shareholders are interested in and what they're wanting to see from the company? And then also just truly trying to continue to enhance board performance. That's everything from ensuring that you have the right right talent around the table, as well as ensuring that you are building the talent for what the company will be 3 years from now versus where it was 2 years ago. So next slide. So really, it's keeping in mind all of those things that are important. The next slide was actually what makes a high functioning board. And so, well, we will go to that, talk about, there we go. So as we talk about what makes a high functioning board, it's really a way we can actually turn this conversation around to talk about what it is that you would need to do to be on a board. And the most important thing is you have to know the calendar of that board, because 100% attendance to the meetings is one of the most talked about and most important aspects of a board's proxy conversation with its shareholders. They want to make certain that you are able to attend every meeting. And a number of boards have meetings that are identified, and if there are events that are occurring, whether they're M&A events, activist events, takeovers, or acquisitions, or you being acquired or merging with another organization, it's the board meetings that are required from the calendar, as well as those that you might add to the board.
And you should anticipate that there will be called board meetings during the year. And you may only have 24 hours notice or even less if they need to get you on the call. And you need to be available. We've had board members call in from boats in the Mediterranean because they needed to be on the call. So it's an interesting process.
Absolutely.
I'll add in a quick comment too. So in the early days of my company, we were pretty small, but we always had board meetings. We had directors. And then we added an advisory committee to our board of directors about 4 years into starting the company. We were 30 people or so, but we knew that we didn't know enough and we needed some outside input. But we quickly learned that we were speaking to the advisors on the advisory committee to our board versus having them speak to us and advise us. And one of the things that we did, which I'm really happy that we did and we've continued to do since then, is to have an annual evaluation for the advisory committee to say, how are we doing? Can we do a better job? How can we become a better functioning board? And one of their things was, setting out the agenda so that you had, an hour for this topic and just a 5-minute, update on that topic. So they knew the relative weight of different topics. The other thing that was really important, and in the early days of the company, I read Inc. magazine religiously, and there were a lot of articles in there about how to have a better functioning board and why that was important. And the thing that struck me then that I still think about is we spend 5 minutes on atta-girls and atta-boys, and the rest of the time on here's the problems, these are the thorny issues we're dealing with, here's where we need help. And a lot of privately held companies especially will not hold the next board meeting until they figure out how to deal with this issue. And the whole point of having a board is to have input on issues so that you can deal with them right when they're happening. So, you know, if you're thinking about setting up a board for your company, if somebody from among the attendees is an owner of a firm and you don't have one, you really need to think about how committed are you, and are you in fact going to have those meetings consistently? And we have, you know, through good times and bad, had consistent meetings with our advisors and our board since the very beginning.
Absolutely. It's so important. And one of the things that comes out of that, you've heard both Eliza and Judy talk about that, there are also committee meetings that occur, and those are typically calendared as well. The beauty of most corporate boards is that they will calendar you 18 months to 2 years in advance. So more times than not, you have sat at the table and have been a part of ensuring that you can attend those, or making people aware of when you are not able to attend them. But that is one of the first things that is asked when you receive a specification on a board assignment. Can you make those dates? Can you make those committee meetings? To do that, it requires you to have a strong structure that allows you to participate. But with that and with everything, it's a culture. A board is a microcosm of that company. It truly is. The tone at the top is what permeates throughout an organization. And it's really important that your culture represents the culture that you would anticipate exists inside the company. Those companies that seem to have high functioning boards they ask questions. They are strategic questions focused on where the business is going, how it's going to impact its shareholders, the value, and you understand financially what the issues are. So you can read a balance sheet, you understand what are the drivers, you know the difference between capital allocation, operating budgets, revenues, and all of the high level aspects that they're talking about in the boardroom. And it's really at the core of it, getting to the long-term direction of the company. A board spends so much of its time focused on the strategy and how you will accomplish the goals that you've established for yourselves. We oftentimes, as outsiders, will hear from the conference calls that occur what guidance is given to Wall Street for the next quarter. But in the boardroom, you're talking about where the company is going over its life cycle, and understanding the talent that they need to make that happen. Next slide. So as we go through this, it really is about who is the most attractive candidates for boards. Well, more times than not, boards want sitting or retired CEOs. When you look at the Russell 3000 makeup of boards, approximately 30% of those boards have a retired, or 30% of those seats, are sitting or retired CEOs. So that tells you that they're looking for board CEOs on those boards. But it also tells you that they're looking for other skills beyond a CEO. And those skills typically are aligned to some functional or financial requirement. So if you take out a sitting CEO or retired CEO and a qualified financial expert, which is typically the chair of an audit committee, That represents approximately 20% of the Russell 3000 board seats. 50% are not CEOs, retired CEOs, or retired CFOs. So that's good news. That's absolutely good news. Next slide.
Let me make one point.
Yes.
So one of the things I say is that, all right, so maybe you're not the CEO, but you've been the head of a major division of a large corporation. To me, that qualifies you as a potential leader. If you have a very successful small business, and typically it's not as small as like my business, but a small business, then you are considered a successful leader. So, well, I think that if you have been a retired partner from one of the big accounting firms, that gives you an edge. If you've been a retired CEO, that has an edge too. Because Matrice says you still got 50% of the other board seats available.
And we'll talk a little bit more about those other seats. There's a slide for those. So what are the skills that are the other 50% and what we're looking for? We're looking especially for your leadership capabilities. What have you done and what is your digital footprint demonstrating that you've done that qualifies you as a leader? So we really are trying to identify individuals that have an experience that they can share in the boardroom that is at a very strategic level that will help to move along that company's, whatever their business plan is. Industry experience is very important. If you're in a chemicals company and we have a retired leader of a P&L in that business, that's extremely important that we look for. And there's this whole size, scale, and scope that's really important. We look at the size of the business. If you're looking at being on a board of a $1 billion company and you're on a $50 million company board, that trajectory is not as strong as a person who may have been in a $500 million company that would understand the trajectory of getting to 1 billion a little easier than the person who may have had a much smaller P&L. Scale, how rapidly did you move along a company and how did you do it? Was it through organic growth? Was it through M&A activity? And understanding how you played a role in that. And then the scope, looking at it, are you a global company? Are you a national company, a local company? All of those things really matter when we're assessing candidates for boards. And then there's always that personal side. Do you fit into the culture of that board? When you think about a board, it's typically 10 to 12 individuals, or 9 to 12, depending on the size of the P&L of the company. But it's a 9 to 12 group of individuals that have come together and they have a culture that they are able to have discourse in a very quality manner, that they can all understand one another, that they have found a way to have dinner together. And they have a culture that typically they don't want to alter. And then there are instances where they are trying to blow up the entire process because they don't like anything about the culture. But those are fewer than, and it's more the norm of companies that do have a culture that they're trying to find someone that fits into that culture. And more times than not, the first thing that I'm often told when I ask, what is it that you're looking for in a director? The first thing they say is, I don't want someone that's going to take up all of the oxygen in the room, meaning they don't want someone that's going to want to do all of the talking, that they understand that this person, that they are a part of a team and that there are equally smart people around the table. So, it's really a culture component to all of this exercise that we go through. The most important part in this leadership process that we have found is the ability to analyze and ask questions. the difference between the CEO and management, which we will talk about later, there are people there doing the day-to-day job. They're not looking for the person on the board that's going to do the job. They're looking for the board to ask questions that will make them think differently about their model in a way that will help them to further whatever that goal is they're attempting to accomplish. And we have found time and again that asking the questions are the differences. And you're able to do that in your interviewing process. And I hope that in your conversation in April that there will be some additional commentary around how to interview. And there are ways in which you can demonstrate your ability to ask good questions. Next slide. I don't know which one it is. We're a little out of order, but that's okay.
We're winging it.
We are. Serving on a board, you know, it's when you think about the opportunity that you have, it is you have the opportunity to truly make a difference in a company and in the company's life cycle. And it's a way in which you're able to further develop and hone your skills. More times than not, most sitting CEOs sit on a board at the request of their own board. Their own board is asking them to understand what it is they're asking for and to understand how they can better improve their own companies by sitting on a board and learning in that environment. So it's oftentimes sitting CEOs and sitting executives in companies are asked to serve on boards by their own leadership.
And one point too is if you are, let's say you're in the C-suite or just below and you're asked to serve on a board, you need to get permission from your company to do that. One of the things that I urge women to do is say, look, this is an opportunity for me to have some career development where I can learn about how other companies handle business and bring that back to our company. So there's value to our company with me getting this additional board experience or corporate experience. And that's a big selling tool because the company is going to be making quite a sacrifice in your time, having you do work that has nothing to do with your company. So use it as a selling tool. That's going to be a special career development opportunity that will benefit your company.
Next slide. So for you, preparing for corporate board service. Actually, Sarah, can you go to the slide that shows the difference between management and the board? Because I think that that's a more important one for right now. Here we go. So really speaking to the differences between a board and management, I think that the most important aspect that occurs in an interview, and when we hear people say, our directors say, we're going to pass on that person. Their main reason for passing is that they didn't feel that the person demonstrated their understanding of the difference between a board and management. A board of directors is there at a much higher level capacity, asking questions. We talk about it in the sense that they are nose in and hands out. So they are putting their nose in the business, but they're not putting their hands in the business. So it's not tactical by any stretch of the imagination. The only time that you go tactical is when you're having that one-on-one conversation with the CEO or perhaps that lead director to further enhance something that they may have asked a question that they may have asked. But in the boardroom, it is so important to keep the conversation strategic and on matters related to the goals and the strategies rather than being tactical on helping the team. They've hired those individuals. Your job is to be the eyes and the ears and to ask the questions. And I know, Judy, you wanted to mention something here.
Yes, in our company now, we're a privately held business, a little over 100 people. We have 25 shareholders, all of whom are employees. So it's a little different than being on a public corporate board. But we have an annual program our CEO does and talks about the differences between leadership, management, ownership, and governance. And a lot of people are all for those. However, you can be on the board of directors, you can be a shareholder, you can be a manager. When you are on the board of directors acting in the capacity of a director, you have to look out for the best interests of the shareholders. That's essentially your duty. And so it's, in my experience seeing other firms, it's sometimes hard for firms to make that differentiation. I had a conference call this morning for one of the outside boards that I'm on, and we had that exact same conversation that, okay, this may be in your personal best interest to do this, but in fact, you are here in your capacity to look out for all of the all of the shareholders in your capacity as a director. So it's really important to understand the difference: ownership, leadership, management, governance.
And I think that's a constant balancing act, but it shouldn't be that hard, that the board members know that they are there in the strategic capacity and they're not there to do the work of the company.
Right.
The minute I feel like I'm starting to get sucked into day-to-day operations, say the bank, I pull back because I don't want to do that. That's not my role.
Absolutely. So let's go to the next slide. We talked about that one. You want to go to demographics?
Somewhere in there, you're going to find it.
There we go.
There you go.
I think it's important for us to just to understand the landscape today as we're talking about boards. And you heard at the onset the conversation about the request of the new California law in requiring women to serve on boards. Globally, that is also the case. We have in the UK and in Norway, they also have quotas that are required. I believe in Norway, it's 30% of all seats should be should go to females, women. In the UK, they are aspiring to 30% on all of their boards. So it is a trend that started on the other side of the pond, if you will. But it's one that is getting momentum in a number of places, and within the legislative bodies of many cities here in North America, that conversation is continuing to hold. We had an organization some years ago, actually about 2012, called Women 2020 that began the conversation, and it came out of a board meeting at Catalyst that we really should have more women on boards. I reflect on when I first started doing board searches in 1995, and we had less than 10% of women on the S&P 500 boards. If you look at the numbers today, the Russell 3000, it was announced that we hit 20% of board seats in the Russell 3000 companies this year. So we hold 5,000 of the 25,000 seats that are out there. But if you look at the S&P, and I'll spend a little time on the S&P because it's an indicator of the larger companies, but women represent 26%. When you go down and add in the public company and private companies that are being tracked, and it's typically, we are looking at about 51 to 5,200 companies, the number of women serving on boards go down to about 15%. So there's still a lot of work to be done. 90% with of S&P 500 have 2 women or more. So while you might hear people say that there have been progress, there has been progress when you reflect on 1995, but there's still a lot of work to be done. A tremendous amount of work to be done. And it's very hard to do because of the two last elements on here. The average age is 67.5. 75 is the most common age of retirement. And over 30% of board members have been on their boards for more than 10 years. So the turnover is slow. And that is the most important point to be made, is that the turnover is slow. This year, because of the continued pressure to add women and the importance of it, and the acknowledgement of what a woman on a board adds in terms of value to a company, a number of companies within the S&P expanded their boards, added a seat to ensure that they could have a woman on their board, a female. So the trends are going in the right direction, but there is tremendous amount of work to be done. But what that says to each and every one of you is that you are a target audience. So it's, what do you need to do to position yourself to actually take advantage of this opportunity that's available right now? And I think that's something that is very important for us to have a conversation about. And I think we should probably go to the slide around preparing for corporate board service so that we can have time for questions. I think that what you have to do as individuals is look at your time, understand your availability, whether you have the kind of flexibility that you would need to serve on a board, understanding that boards have a number of circumstances that can come up that would require even more time. The average amount of time that you will spend on a board based on the NACD's numbers is somewhere north of 300 hours a year. But you also have to look at your risk tolerance and also looking at, are you truly ready to serve on a board? Meaning, have you had enough business experiences to drive decision making in a way that will help elevate a company? Also, we ask that you look at all of the various training capabilities, our training schools out there for classes around understanding board governance, and NACD is an excellent place to do that. But also, build out your capability in the governance space. Start off in a not-for-profit and then work your way up. So I think there are ways in which you can begin to do that. Looking at your board bio, which I think is in a part of this, I think it's on the next slide, but there are also other things that you can do to begin to elevate yourself and to have conversations with individuals who serve on boards that can help you serve on a board.
And crew, going to the crew conference and about corporate boards is great. And as Matrice said, the National Association of Corporate Directors has a significant amount of training. They even have a certification program that you can obtain that, and that will help in establishing credibility. Show that you have been doing your homework and learning about what's involved in corporate service.
So the most important part, I think, is on the next slide. It should say network. Network, network, network. When we look at corporate boards, less than 10% of boards are filled through executive search. The majority are still completed through individual networks. More times than not, your CEO or the leader of your company has been called to serve on a board, and they typically can serve on only one. Ask your CEO to include you in that dialogue if they're asked to serve on a board and they have no capacity. Ask him to mention you. More times than not, CEOs are not aware unless you've told them you're interested, that you have an interest. And it's truly a great place to go. There are a number of other ways in which you can do this, including a number of board sessions. And I know that Judy and Eliza have some additional comments because we're running over here.
So this is Judy Nitsch from Nitsch Engineering in Boston. I first of all want to say thanks to Sarah and Wendy for organizing this. I wish we had had it 30 years ago when I was starting out in this world. And I think Matrice did a great job of teeing up for everyone what a whole bunch of the important aspects of being on a corporate board entail. I've picked 10 little data points or stories to share with you about my experience, because I think as much as you hear about it in general, and especially when you hear about, huge public companies, the fact of the matter is I'm guessing most of the 300 people on the call are probably looking to get on, are likely to be eligible to get onto a smaller board, such as my company or one of the firm boards that I'm on. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was being a corporator and then becoming a trustee of Eastern Bank, both of which were paid board positions. Eastern Bank is the largest Massachusetts-based bank, and it's a mutual bank. So by mutual bank, it means that we as members of the board do not have to put the money in, which I think you'll hear this about from Eliza. But in fact, the depositors are the owners of a mutual bank. However, we have other responsibilities, such as helping them with sales to get additional accounts into the bank. If we hear something interesting, good or bad, about the bank out in the community, we have to bring that back to the bank. Or if there's something going on in the community that we think the bank should know about, obviously talk to them. So it's important to know what your role is as an outside director. So being a corporator meant that you just went to the annual meeting every year, and it was more of a way for the bank to say, essentially, attaboy, attagirl to their customers. And I was asked to be a corporator when our firm made the Inc. 500. Very few service firms make the Inc. 500, and certainly I think we were one of the very few at Eastern Bank that had made it. So I was asked to be a corporator. Of course, I showed up, did what I was supposed to do, and then I was asked to be a trustee of the bank, and the trustees meet quarterly, and I was asked at one point to be on the audit committee. And being on the audit committee, this was about 10 or 12 years ago, and I talked to my attorney about it, because back then audit committees were getting sued, and there was a lot of issues with people that were unhappy with what was going on with the bank. And I know Matrice had these in her slides, but didn't get to them, about shareholder activism and so forth. And so I had decided, after speaking with my attorney about it, to not go on the audit committee. And one of it was, I didn't really want to be exposed to that risk. But the main reason was I was running a business, and I didn't really have the time it was going to require to be on the audit committee and do the amount of work that was going to be required. So I chose not to do it. That said, I was also, shortly after that, asked to be on the trustee nominating committee, which I went on happily, and I felt like I was a really important contributing member. Now, Eastern Bank, presidents, the three that I've served under, are all middle-aged white men, and they all understood that they had limited networks in helping to establish a diverse board. So current president, Bob Rivers, put together a nominating committee that had every type of diverse person, including middle-aged white men, on the nominating committee. And he said, you are going to know people that the rest of us don't know. And right now, if you were to look at the Eastern Bank board, it would be probably one of the most diverse that you have ever seen. And we have an African-American woman who is the lead director at this point. And that took work for the bank to come up with those names and those people, and to make them or help them become important contributing members of the board. So, there's probably a bank like that near you. And I would say, if you're interested in this, find out what's a story with the bank with whom your company banks, or even just look at where your personal work is and just talk to them about it. You never know what's going to come up from it. The next point I'd like to make is, so I was asked, because of my network, again, underscore Matrice's point about networking, I was asked to be on the board of Pannoni Associates, which is about a 1,400-person engineering firm based in Philadelphia with north of 30 offices in the United States. And they're, more than 10 times the size of my firm. I'm the only female on their board. They had just become an ESOP and decided they needed to expand their board. And there are now 3 outside directors. One is a African-American man, there's myself, and a middle-aged white man. And all of the current members of the Pannoni board are white men. So we provide a big amount of diversity to them. I'll share one quick story, which I've shared many times before, and Chuck Pannoni knows it's fine with him that I share this. We had the pre-package from the board. I had gone through it looking at some of the vice president approvals that we had to vote on at that meeting. And I'm going through, and these were great candidates. And then all of a sudden it struck me that it was John and Fred and Mike and Sam. And so I thought, and none of the last names were seemingly to me minorities. And so the motion, or the agenda came up with that item. The motion was made to approve it, and they went right to all those in favor. And I said, wait a minute, discussion. And they thought it would be perfunctory approval. And I said, this is a wonderful group of people. I said, I'm just curious, are any of them minorities? And it doesn't look like any of them are women. And I said, I am concerned about the message you're sending to your employees, because all of the employees in this company have their eyeballs on this decision. And if somebody that's an employee that has great aspirations for leadership doesn't see anybody like them on the board or in a corporate officer position, they're going to think there's not an opportunity for them here, and they're going to leave. And those are the people that you want to make sure stay engaged, because they're going to be the next corporate officers and potential candidates for your board. And then what I said, and I think this will underscore some of the other points as well, you're not there to be a pretty face or to be a yes man or anything like that. You're there to bring up the things that are intuitively obvious to you, but maybe a blind spot to everybody else on the board. And I said to them, what concerns me more is that this group of candidates got to this level of the company, the officers and the board, and nobody else noticed it. I said, you guys need to understand that you have a blind spot on this. And everybody acknowledged, absolutely right. There was another brand new outside director that was at that meeting. And he said, I had the same observation that Judy did, but I didn't know if it was appropriate to say it. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to say the things that are hard to say, because that's why you have me here. So you need to be confident in what you're saying when you're on a board, and it's okay to ask questions if you don't understand something. A lot of the ESOP things that are brought up on the 2 ESOP boards I'm on, they're not my area of expertise, so I just ask questions, and they want you to understand it, because we are making decisions as a board that are in the best interest of the shareholders, which are all of the employees at an ESOP firm. So let's see. Through a search firm, I was asked to be a paid outside director on an architecture firm. They were in the upper Midwest. They had, as I recall, this was quite a few years ago, they had maybe 6 offices. And this particular board met every other month for a full day. And for me to get to this location was going to take a full day of travel, because it was 2 or 3 flights to get to them. And then, so a day there, a day in the meeting, and a day to get home, plus the prep work I had to do. I said no to the headhunter. I said, there's just isn't enough money in this. What they're offering for an outside director position, it's not, my time is more valuable than that. And she was kind of surprised, brought it back to them and said, well, okay. And then a year later, she said, okay, they would like you to consider again being on the board. I said, well, have they changed the compensation? And she said, no. I said, no, my time is more valuable than that. And I haven't heard from them since, and that's fine, but I'm sure I could have helped them, but it wasn't what they were looking for, I guess, at the time. But, sometimes being on a board is not always the best thing if it's not fitting in with what you personally think is important for you. If we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to share a little bit about how Nitsch identifies our potential board members, because this may be a lesson for some of our attendees. We only allow shareholders in the firm to be on our board of directors at Nitsch, and that people self-select. So if someone is interested in being on the board, we do an annual request. They have to answer certain questions, have an interview with the nominating committee of the board. And one year, a fairly new, younger shareholder put her name in for the board. And I can't remember how many positions we had, but she wowed them in the interview and came on the board. And one of the nominating committee conversations was that, all of us are older, and she's going to bring a different perspective to the board meetings as a younger employee and as a newer shareholder, and that was important to us. And so one of my messages to everyone is, don't say to yourself, oh, they'll never select me because I'm young or I'm a new shareholder or whatever. You never know that may be exactly what they're looking for. So put your neck out. At the very least, if you don't get it, they're going to say, she's someone to keep our eye on. We also have an advisory committee to our board of directors, as I mentioned earlier, and we will often look at what is coming up in the next couple of years with the company that we need outside advice on. So one year, I recall we said, okay, we want a new advisor on the committee that is with an engineering firm that's not a competitor and not a client, that has had an internal ownership transition, that has branch offices, that's done mergers and acquisitions. And when you put all these criteria together, we said, this one person that I knew was chairman of his firm, larger firm than ours. I called him up and I said, we need a new outsider on our board. Your name came to the top. Let me tell you about it. He just chuckled. He said, Judy, you're not going to believe this. He said, we just had a conversation at our board meeting that we needed to have outsiders on our board. And one of my assignments is to look into, okay, what are some of the ways that we could do that? So he said, I would love to be on your advisory committee. And he was an important contributing member for 16 years. So, there's always criteria and you never know when you might need it. So the next ones are more on dealing with search firms. So I chaired the Boston Architectural College Presidential Search Committee, which started in December of last year, completed our work in June. We had a new president begin in July, and worked with Spencer Stewart on that. And I thought for myself that it would be kind of interesting to get to know Spencer Stewart because, if I did a good job, maybe they'd put me in their database and might be someone they would consider. But in fact, I've never heard from them. And so I know I've talked to them about it, but I've never heard anything back. So, sometimes even if you have a plan, it doesn't always work out, but that's okay. You put your neck out, put yourself out there. I also served as a member of the search committee for the Crew Network CEO. Korn Ferry was the search firm that we selected for that. And I think also being on that search committee, I learned a lot about how to be a good board member and how to search committees compile the list of potential potential candidates. And especially with the BAC one, and they were similar, but the BAC one in particular, input came from a lot of different places. And if people knew you, you got your name put in there. I can't tell you how many people put my name in. I said, oh no, I have a day job, thank you. I am not interested in a college presidential position, but it was flattering, but no, thanks. But I learned that
So Judy, I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, because I know we're running out of time. Sarah, how much more time do we have left?
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay, so Judy, if you don't mind, is there any other key points you want to make? I want to get a few points in before we have to wrap up.
Sure, my key point on this story was just that people on the search committee will either quickly say yes or no to you. So if they don't know you, you get a no. And so you have to make sure, again, that your network is working well. So with that, Eliza?
Thanks. So a couple of things I wanted to just stress, because I think my crew experience is something that's important for most of you all that are listening. One of the things that Matrice said was about building your public profile. And that's one of the things I decided to do when I started in my early 30s. In my late 30s, I wanted to go on a corporate board. And that meant I actually hired a PR firm to represent me to increase my digital footprint, even though in those days it wasn't much digital. I looked for opportunities where I could serve on nonprofit boards where men served. And so I ended up chairing the Museum of Natural History board. I was the first woman to chair that board in its 50-year history. And that put me in front of a lot of men. And they saw me as a leader, and that was very important. So while we may want to go on the board of shelters that serves women and children, on the other hand, if you want to be around where the men are, you're going to have to go to a board that's predominantly male. And because of that experience, and because my profile was so high, I got asked for my first advisory board, and that was for Area Taste, which is a division of James T. Wilson. I wasn't paid any fees for that, but I got free clothes. I'll tell you something, it was great getting clothes. It was fun. So then, next slide. So then I started Solender Hall in 1991, and that was a commercial real estate company for nonprofits. If I had to give you advice, I'd say starting a small little boutique firm is probably not the way to go to get on a corporate board. I should have stayed back in human resources. It's an oil company, but I went a different path. And I became president of the Crew Dallas board. And go back.
Oh, sorry.
And on that Crew Dallas board, that also helped me raise my board profile. And because of that, I was on the board of the UT Southwestern, which is a medical school. And what I was doing there got me to the attention of a pharmaceutical board. And they asked me to go on their board because of my board service with the medical school. From there, the treasurer, back at that Museum of Natural History board, remembered my leadership skills and asked me to go on his new bank board. And as an incorporator like Judy did, one of the things you need to be aware of is that if you go on the board of a bank, the chances are you're going to have to buy stock in that bank. So you're not, the cost benefit analysis is, do I want to spend $50,000, $100,000 or whatever to go on the board of this bank, and the director's fees on a small board may only be maybe $500 a meeting. So you're going to have to balance that out. For me, in the end, with the Dallas National Bank Board, I made a lot of money when we eventually sold the bank. So it paid off, but it meant I had to make an investment. For crew members, women in real estate, in general, to go on the board of a bank is a good way of leveraging your commercial real estate experience, because banks and real estate go hand in hand. And it makes a lot of sense. So it all was very helpful. I ended up going and moving on in my crew experience to become president of Crew Network, which was great. And because of that, Club Corp came to Crew and to me and asked if I would serve on the Club Corp Advisory Board to help them bring more women into their clubs. That turned out to be a wonderful experience. Lots of free trips to major resorts like the Homestead and so on, and also to have free memberships in their clubs. And that put me in front of a whole new group of people, and I got to go on more advisory boards. So today, I have increased my profile with civic boards, serving on, next slide, on 2 Dallas tax increment financing boards. Locally, I chaired the National Association of Corporate Directors, North Texas chapter. And then after we sold the Dallas National Bank, I went on the board of Community Trust Bank of Texas, which then evolved, as you'll see looking down the slide, to what it is today, which is Origin Bank Corp, which is a publicly traded company. And for me, the process of taking a company from public from private to public was quite an interesting experience. And the whole process of learning how to work with NASDAQ and so on, to today, where I am now chairing the compensation committee, which is not as arduous as chairing the audit committee, but it is pretty high profile. And I'm spending a tremendous amount of time outside of committee meetings and board meetings on compensation issues. I also serve on the nominating and governance committee and risk committees. So there's a lot of involvement in the bank. I can't tell you how many hours a week I spend on it. It depends on what's going on. It's light week, but next week is going to pick up. I have to drive to bank board meetings in Louisiana. Bank boards meet more often than other boards, and that's one of the problems with being on a bank board. And then for fun, Lost Oak Winery is my current fun board, and with that one I am having fun learning about the wine business, which is surprising, all the complexities of the wine business, but there are many. So my last slide, if you'll go to that, really talks about my board tips. I'm not going to go over all of them because I've just mentioned them. But one of the things I do want you to remember is, as Matrice said, since most boards are dominated by men, don't look at men as the enemy. They're not, because I always remind myself it's men that voted to give women the right to vote. And the same thing is true with serving on a corporate board. So find mentors, primarily they should be men, I hate to say this, but also be a referral source for other women. I can't serve on a lot of boards, but I can refer board search consultants like Matrice and other people that are looking for board members to women that I know. And so I keep a Rolodex in my head of who are women that I know that I think could be terrific board members. And I work at that on my company board as well. It's a little harder to serve on the board and push for women on a board. Because remember, it's men who have to make the decision, but you can certainly spend a lot of time advocating in a very low-key way. That you don't want to be too forceful. So, but make sure that your board supports your service, as Matrice said, and then just enjoy it. I find my board meetings are so much fun. I learn about so many different industries, issues, and the people that I serve with have gotten to be really good friends. So I certainly advocate for that. So those are my comments. Anything else, Matrice?
Questions?
We have a few questions, and it is the top of the hour, so that's perfect timing. Thank you. But I'm going to go ahead and go with the questions. I have one that says, I've been on a public board for over 15 years now and have lots of cross-sector experience, private, public, banking, finance, etc. How do I leverage my skills to transition to a private board? Is there a way to apply, or is it via recruitment?
Private company, you want, so she's been in public company and she wants private company boards. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what I'm reading, yes.
That's interesting.
See, usually the other way around. You usually want to go, because in the hierarchy of boards, the most prestigious board to be on is a public company board. So most people want to go from private to public.
Unless she's been in an activist situation and now has no time.
That's true.
So one of the things I would always tell private company boards, more times than not, leverage their own networks, and it's typically the CEO or the lead director where those relationships come. What I would do if you're interested in a private company, I would actually target the companies that I'm interested in and then begin to forge relationships with those entities. There are a number of companies, large private companies, that do use executive search and do have best practices around that, as they likely exercised their own networks and are looking to have a different perspective in the room. So it is worth reaching out to the search firms that you have relationships with and do that. We do a number of private companies. I think this year alone, I think we had probably about 52 searches for private companies. So reach out to the search firms, but also leveraging your own networks. The other place that I've found the best help, quite frankly, on the private company side is within the Chamber of Commerce. Typically, they have deeper relationships there and are engaged in those type of organizations.
Okay, and then I have another question. As a Canadian, is there any particular tip or nuances between boards in Canada versus the US?
I wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, so there are some nuanced differences, but the way in which you go about doing a search to get on a board is pretty much the same. The nuanced differences are related to the law. But any stock exchange company, whether it is a Canadian stock exchange, a Hong Kong stock exchange, Japanese, they all have different regulations. So you would have the regulatory components that would be different. But the way in which you go about getting on those boards are fairly similar. We do work for about 7, actually, we have about 7 Canadian companies that we do work with. And the process is pretty much the same as the Japanese, as is the Hong Kong, as is the London, as is the US.
Okay. Is the slow increase in the number of women on boards, especially as a director, more the result of companies not asking women to join their boards, or is it women not putting their names out there for consideration?
Well, one of the things that Matrice said earlier was the fact that there just aren't that many board openings. When people stay on a board 10 to 15 years, your board rotations, the board may have maybe 1 or 2 positions open every few years. So that means there are just not that many opportunities. That's part of the problem.
I want women to be more bold. I want women to ask for the seat. I am not surprised when an 18-year-old young man says that he can be the CEO of a company and probably have not finished high school yet. Women will look at a specification and point out everything that we don't have and where we don't fit the spec. I would like for us to be a little more bold and a little more brave, and to look at the macro and say that for the most part, you can do the job, and the other parts you can learn or get the training to do it. My experience is that men are much more likely to ask than women. That said, I am so excited that we have ways in which women can come together and learn about these things through the additional training, to understand that they do have a seat at the table and should have a seat at the table, and leverage crew and other organizations that are creating the type of training that you all have.
The thing I would add is that being part of a network is important, and if you know people who are on boards, let them know that you're interested. You can't really apply for a board position that I'm aware of, and a lot of it's who you know and who knows you. A lot of the research that Crew Network did a few years ago about mentors and sponsors, it's the sponsors out there, they're going to say, hey, suggest so-and-so for this board. But if they don't know you and they don't know that you're interested in it, your name won't come up.
NACD did a study some years ago that had the time it takes to get on a board. Women were typically 18 months longer than men, because men, and the response was they felt that men asked the question and said, I want to serve on a board. What do I need to do? A woman would say, these are my skills. Do you think I'm good enough to serve on a board? So I do think that there's some ways in which I'm excited about your training in April. I think it's going to be amazing. Yep.
One last question. Are there reading materials that you think you would recommend for someone interested in learning more about the process? And I know, Judy, I think you said you read Inc. magazine all the time.
I would add one thing, and it kind of dovetails with what the other two speakers have said. In order to get on a corporate board, you have to show what you've been able to do on a nonprofit board. And for me, getting to know people on different college boards has really been helpful. And there's a saying, being on a college or university board of trustees, that they look for three things among their trustees: time, talent, and treasury, or wisdom, wealth, and work. And what they mean is that you have to spend the time, you have to have a particular talent, whether it's for, nominating committee or student affairs or audit or finance or investment committee, but you have to have that. And you have to commit some of your treasure to them, again, for a nonprofit board. But a lot of times the other people on that nonprofit board are the people that would be looking for or being referral sources for potential directors at other places. So I would say definitely think about that, or an advisory committee at a college. There's a great publication for higher ed called AGB, Association of Governing Boards, and they have a good website. You might want to take a look at that. And then both have mentioned NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors, which also has robust materials on their website.
Absolutely.
They do.
There are other things. I mean, Fortune and Forbes put out quite a few articles on board service and trends. All of the accounting firms, I would encourage each and every one of you to subscribe online to every accounting firm's board effectiveness site. So Deloitte is board effectiveness, E&Y is board organization, KPMG is board excellence, but go on their sites and pull up all of their the articles that are pertinent to the board, and then it will ask you if you want to subscribe. Grant Thornton also has one. In addition to that, I would also look at the major law firms. Wachtell puts out an annual survey on trends that are going to be important for the next year. Sullivan Cromwell does the same thing within governance. So look for all of the major firms that do a lot of work with the activists, especially. They typically have very good websites on that. But the most important thing that you can do is to begin to think about yourself in that light. And what that requires also is for you to think about, what kind of thought leadership can I contribute? So think about what you can do to more effectively build your reputation as a leader in your industry.
On that note, I think that's a perfect segue to say thank you very much for your time. We are at 1:10 in the Midwest, so we are 10 minutes past, which is just fine. Thank you, ladies, for your knowledge and your information and your stories. And I think people who attended today got a few nuggets that will help them prepare and understand the process better. So we really appreciate your time. For those of you still online, we will send a link to the recording. We'll send an eval. And so I would love it to get some feedback. And otherwise, let me know if you need anything, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.